I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the Kia EV9, the latest vehicle on Hyundai Kia's electric vehicle platform and supersized for the pleasure of families across the globe, because this electric SUV is huge, even though it doesn't really look like that because it's so well styled.
Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct.
The ultra-classy EV9 is not only one of the finest examples of electric vehicle futurism, in my opinion, it will also be the most expensive Kia ever sold in Australia when it arrives in the fourth quarter of 2023, priced higher than everything else. So this GT-Line all-wheel drive here will expect to be more than an EV6 GT, which is well into $100,000. They have 1,200 coming in the first year. That's 100 cars a month, but there's already been 5,000 expressions of interest. So I reckon the EV9 is going to be the hottest ticket when it gets to our country, and I'll tell you why in this video. We're expecting to see 3 variants of EV9 when it goes on sale in Australia. The standard one will have a 76.1 kilowatt hour battery, rear wheel drive and 418 kilometers of range. The mid-spec having a 99.8 kilowatt hour battery, 541 kilometers of range, but rear wheel drive and all wheel drive, and that hasn't been confirmed for Australia. This car here, which is the top spec GT line, also has a 99.8 kilowatt hour battery, all wheel drive, 497 kilometers of range, and pretty much everything you can load in the EV9. This is the showcase of what this amazing electric SUV is capable of. Now, arguably the most striking aspect of the EV9 is the way it looks at the front. Kia calls this the digital tiger face, which is an evolution of the Peter Schraer design front of the combustion engine cars, but here it's all very much flat-faced and super ultra modern. This car here is a Korean spec one, so it has these little imprints of lights here in this panel. The Australian car will just be filled. It won't have these lights here, but it will have these 12 LEDs on each side and this awesome blade that runs down here as a DRL, but becomes the blinker when you put the indicators on. It really has an amazing presence. Kia says the drag coefficient of an EV9 is 0.28, but what they don't mention is the frontal area of this vehicle, because it is a really big car. This big bluff front is huge, and when you look at the dimensions of it compared to, say, a Sorento, which is already considered a large SUV, this GT line here with the roof rails is 80 millimeters taller, 80 millimeters wider, 200 millimeters longer, and riding on a nearly 300 millimeter longer wheelbase. So it's these tapering of these creases at the front end and the styling, and particularly at the back, that makes it look so much smaller than it really is on the road. Even compared to driving next to a Sorento, the EV9 looks smaller from the rear, and it's so much bigger than that already large SUV. This GT line here is wearing the largest wheel package available on the EV9, 21-inch wheels. It also has 20s and 19s. These 21s here with the 4-spoke design really fits in well, I think, with the design of the car as a whole, and it wears a serious tyre package. 285/45 R21 Michelin Primacy Tour tyres, and as we shall discover when we drive it, they really do work well, even on these wet roads in South Korea. Suspension-wise, we have struts up front with a multi-link arrangement to hold them in place and locate them, and at the back we have multi-link independent rear suspension. We don't have adaptive damping, but I don't even know whether the EV9 needs that. Again, we will discover that when we drive it. The beauty of the EV9 is not only the subtlety of its design detailing, such as having these flush pop-out door handles, having this lovely aluminium line that runs along the bottom of the DLO and tapers and fattens as it comes back up here, but this section here I think is the best part of the car. The way that it tapers in, the way that the glass house leans in. So from behind, with these really striking lighting signatures, it makes the EV9 look so much more compact than it actually is when you look at the dimensions of the car. Around the back here, super clean, very minimal badging, which is great, just Kia's new logo. EV9 here, we have an electric tailgate. In here, Kia says that the EV9 has 571 litres of boot space with all 3 rows occupied, even though under here there isn't really much. It sort of has room for a toolkit. This one has a fire extinguisher, don't know whether that's standard. To drop the 3rd row is just a simple push of the 2 electric buttons here, and you can do the same with the 2nd row as well. Here we have a little flap that's got a little boot thing. Underneath it, it says boot hold. So I think when you're inside the car and you want to open the electric tailgate, you just hold that and the boot opens. Below that, we have a 12-volt outlet. We'll have an Australian plug outlet here for the 250-volt 16-amp thing with a little cover just here to run things like electric barbecues and other stuff that you do in outdoor activities that you don't need to have another kind of generator. I've obviously got all those electronic buttons here. Generally, this is really well finished. And even though it is not as large as the passenger space, it's still plenty. With all rows down, Kia says 2,320 litres of boot space. The theme of the EV9 interior is very much inspired by the minimalism of contemporary modern furniture, or certainly if you have taste in that department. Inside here we have recycled materials down in the pillars here, across the tops of the doors, down along the bottom of the dash here, and then it's biomaterials for things like the seats, the lower sections, this infill in the doors here, that sort of stuff. There is two different treatments that we've had in the EV9s we've driven here. This one has sort of a more coffee coloured seats with darker trim and dark pillars and headlining. The other car we drove though had a cappuccino coloured headlining, which was sort of a light beigey brown and really did look better in my opinion than this one, but all of them is really tasteful. The soft touch materials are more about the matte and the softness of the way that they feel than their squidginess, but I really don't think that matters. It's all really consistent. So while the door here is not necessarily squidgy, it just looks lovely and smooth. Smooths in with the dash top. This trim here in this car is more of a wood finish. In the other car with the cappuccino headlining, it sort of had a scratchy grey that wasn't quite as nice as what we have here, but all of this is really, really lovely. This trim here is sort of like a material finish. It doesn't feel particularly clothy, but it is a material. Same fill in the doors here, same on the side of the center console here. These screens are two 12.3-inch screens joined by a 5-inch screen in the middle that does the HVAC stuff. It's probably easier for the front passenger to see that than the driver, but you can generally see it there, and it combines with actual manual controls. So we've got temperature here, fan speed, temperature for the passenger, a big volume dial here. All of that stuff really matters for functionality in a modern car, and I like the fact that Kia has really made an effort to pay attention to stuff like that. About the only thing, in my opinion, that looks a little bit dorky is the transmission thing. It's this big, ugly block that comes out here. Park is in the end. The start button for EV is in here. A little bit difficult to work out when you first start the car, but when you own it, that won't be a problem. And to put it into drive, it's twisting it like it is in a lot of these sort of cars. The steering wheel here is sort of flat topped and flat bottomed, but really lovely to hold. The drive mode and the terrain mode are at the bottom here. It has electric adjustment in this car, as do the seats. Even the driver gets like an ottoman function where the front of it lifts up underneath your legs. You must be in cruise control on the freeway, I imagine, tilted back a bit to have that to be functional, but for the passenger riding there with the seat reclined, it's really, really great. These headrests here are also quite spongy on your head, just adds to the general comfort of the interior of the EV9. And on the freeway, it is so quiet, and the view ahead is so great across that big flat bonnet that it's just like a really great highway car, which is unusual for an EV because you're kind of normally worried that they're going to run out of range. This Kia, being the GT line, has the Meridian surround sound system. Kia is yet to say how many speakers it has, but it really does sound great regardless of which row you're in. And all of these speaker grills have this really cool pattern on top of them in the center of the dash here. Even on the doors here where they're metallic, down in the bottoms of the doors here where it's even more metallic and looks a little bit classy and expensive. We've got fan cooling and heating for both front seats and the seats behind. We've got steering heating on the door here. To open the bonnet, which actually has a little bit of storage under it, is a double press of the button here next to a boot button on the side of it and the button that opens the charging flap at the back. So the ergonomics are all really good. As for the storage, one area where it falls down, because like many other Korean cars, it only takes a really small bottle in the doors here, but this stuff is great. In the center here, we've got this little Jalusi garage door thing with two cup holders here. Down in the middle here, we've got this huge tray. Above that, a pair of USB-C ports and a little flap that opens the 12-volt charger. In here, we've got the wireless charging in the center here with a bit where you put the key. Another little tray here underneath the center armrest, and a few other switches for parking, auto hold, hill descent control, that sort of stuff. This, comfort-wise and vision-wise, I think is really good. This Korean spec EV9 is not representative of what we're going to get in Australia because this is a 6-seat version. We're only going to get the 7-seat with a full bench, which is actually quite flat, but does give a really good view, has a different center console arrangement here, so is a little bit de-spec'd from this. These buckets are so much more comfortable than the bench. They have the ottoman function like the front, where you can bring the thing out from underneath your legs, you can tilt them back. It has a massage function that is the most delightfully enjoyable one I've ever used in my life. It is full vibration set into these fold down armrests here. The rest of it in here is kind of similar to the front. We have recycled materials on the doors, and in the middle here, all the carpeted floor mats are recycled, full flat floor. What the Australian car has is a really deep tunnel here and a little flap down the bottom here which can take your mobile phone. This 6-seat version has this tray that slides out here and has another bit that slides out again, or you can pop that back in and you've got the depth of that tray, which is what's buried in under there in the Aussie version. We have another row of climate control here with these vents in the roof here. We have proper grips in the roof, plus these B-pillar grips. At the backs of the seats we have map pockets, and while this would be nice if it was actually material, the feeling of the plastic in here is super smooth and matches the consistency of all of the rest of the interior. Ditto the Meridian sound speakers in here, that nice metallic grille finish. We've only got room for a little mincy water bottle in the door here, but hey ho. We've got 2 cup holders in the center here, USB-C chargers on the sides of both front seats like several other Kia models. Generally, the vision, the comfort in here is amazing, but it's just a shame that we don't get the 6-seat. Now, getting into the third row in this 6-seat version is all electric. In the 7-seat one we'll get, it's just the press and release and slide like it is in other Kia models. Getting in the back here though, it's actually reasonably easy. This seat will return automatically. In the Australian cars, you'll need to slide it back, but it'll remember the backrest position. I've set this seat up so it still had ample legroom in the front here, and I'm still only just touching the seat in front of me. So this is full adult size space in a third row. It's only for 2 people, but the comfort is really good. Now we've got a cup holder here, which I've got my little water bottle in. We've got a USB-C port in the wall here, which is matched on the other side. The other side has 2 full cup holders, whereas this has only got 1. These buttons here actually electronically recline the backrest here, bring it back and forward. It's super comfortable, this seat. It's not as spacious as the one in the middle, but there's still really good under the thigh support, even though the cushion isn't really that long. And like every other row, the trim is the same. It's that biomaterial that feels nice and smooth. I reckon it feels better than leather. So if this is the way of the future, then bring it on. We also have 2 air vents in the roof here, just above each passenger, and even though this headrest in front of me is quite wide, I still have a really good view out. So this, finally, is a 7-seater that's actually a full adult 7-seater.
Kia provided only basic information for the GT-Line all-wheel drive at launch, with a range claim of 497 kilometres WLTP and a charging time of 24 minutes on an ultra-fast charger to go from 10 to 80%. In moderate city and freeway driving, our test GT-Line all-wheel drive averaged 18.2 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, which points towards Kia's range claim being accurate. In harder driving, the EV9's energy consumption increased to around 28.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, but eventually settled to a consistent 22.7 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometres, which is actually pretty good for this 3-ton SUV doing fairly quick highway speeds.
In terms of the technology that this Korean spec EV9 GT line offers, the auto lane change function is really good. The adaptive cruise, the way that it tells you what your average speed is in the average speed sections, warns you where the speed cameras are and slows down for it. I don't think the Australian cars are going to have all these features, but it works so well in Korea that you can see why all this technology is in here, because it completely makes sense. As for its performance on the freeway, this 99.8 kilowatt hour all-wheel drive model, it's 283 kilowatts, 600 newton meters, or unless you option the boost mode, takes it to 700 newton meters, meaning your top line electric SUV permanently has 0 to 100 in 5.3 second capability rather than 0 to 100 in 6 seconds. So it really does punch hard. To get the boost mode, it's just simply ordering it through the Kia Connect app, which means it's just a software update for the car. Along the motorways, while they're all limited to 100, the Koreans actually tend to do sort of 120 to 140, and doing that, it wasn't really that bad a consumption. It was sort of around 23 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, which is actually pretty good, and it feels planted and quiet and rides well. The EV9 doesn't have adaptive dampers. Kia hasn't said what sort of dampers it has actually so far. We suspect that they're the frequency select ones, but it has a really nice ride, and we're wearing 21-inch wheels in this spec. The way that it goes over bumps and then sort of glides back to a position, sort of wafts and lands down, is really luxurious, and it just suits the sort of loping comfort of the vehicle. Then there's the corners. The first thing you've got to think about is that we're dealing with a car that is apparently around 3,000 kilos, but that actually undersells the way that EV9 handles dynamically. The steering is not mega quick geared, it's 3 turns lock to lock, but the weighting is nice and firm. It doesn't feel like super natural or super connected to the front wheels, but it is accurate. There's a response either side of straight ahead, and using the eye pedal into corners, it trail brakes itself into corners, kind of like what an Ioniq 6, Ioniq 5 and EV6 do, but just in a much bigger version, and really does handle extremely well. You could almost call it chuckable in a way, because the batteries are so low, and even though the weight is spread right to the breadth of the car, which does make it sort of feel quite weighty as it's turning, it is a low center of gravity. The balance is really good on these wet roads, on switchback corners. Generally, the EV9 was fantastic. Like, it didn't roll too much. It had a bit of movement from the rear end, occasional slip from the front wheels when asking for all the performance out of corners, but really small amounts given that we're on wet roads. And in general, a surprising amount of dynamic depth for what is a huge SUV, as we know. The brakes too, like using the regenerative braking, but also really hauling on the brakes. This thing pulled up really well. It has this sort of finessed polish to the way that all of these systems blend together that actually enhances the feeling of the EV9 being a genuine premium vehicle, even though it's a Kia. It is truly premium in the way that it drives and in the way that it performs. The lower spec models, the base car, which we suspect will be called the Air in Australia, has a 160 kilowatt, 350 Newton meter power outputs, 0 to 100 in 8.2 seconds. The long range rear drive has 150 kilowatts and 350 Newton meters, 9.4 seconds to 100. So they're both significantly slower than this, being the 5.3 or 6 version. I don't even know whether this Kia launch car has the boost control or not. I don't think that it does, but either way, it's quick and it doesn't let up once it gets above 100. It keeps hauling smoothly and quietly and surprisingly efficiently. The lane keep assistance is fairly persistent in the EV9. I can feel it sort of nudging at either side of here all the time, but again, you can turn it off, as you can in all of them, by a button on the steering wheel. It is a little bit less intrusive than it is in certain other models, but it is still persistently there. Although, given that all the roads in South Korea seem to mainly be freeways, you can understand why the Koreans are very persistent in their assistance in the steering department. What hits home though is that the EV9 has this imperious feeling about it. I'm sitting high, looking across that lovely broad bonnet, at that lovely panorama screen, just feeling the refinement and the seat comfort and the general class and quality of it. This is a really luxurious SUV, and all of that matches with the look of it so beautifully. The tech blended with the warmth of the interior, the look of it on the outside that's so striking and so appealing, just makes me I actually kind of love it. I don't want to have a family of 7 to support, but I would happily enjoy driving this SUV, certainly in freeway stuff, for a considerable period of time. I think the success of the EV9 hinges not on its refined driving experience or its vast 7-seat space or its competitive charging times, its strong performance, its pretty good electric vehicle range for something this big. It is all about the way it looks. I think that the EV9 is a stunning piece of rolling architecture and makes the EV6 look dated. Let us know what you think in the comments about that, but I think this car truly lifts Kia to a new premium level among mainstream brands, and it looks great in every single colour, and that's really important for a class of a vehicle like this. What sets the EV9 apart though is that it will be the first super large electric SUV, genuine proper 7-seater to go on sale in Australia, and the only competitor it will have is the Mercedes-Benz EQS, which is so much more expensive than what this car is going to be. So if that doesn't make the EV9 a unique selling proposition in its own right, then I think the styling will do the rest, because I love it. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and tell us what you think about the Kia EV9 and how great it looks and how good it is to drive, or about chasing cars in general. Thanks for watching.